The night was dark and stormy, the rain pounding against the pavement as Officer Jake Williams tightened his grip on Rex's leash. His German Shepherd partner moved silently beside him, ears perked, muscles tensed. The call had come in just minutes ago, an armed robbery in progress at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Auburn. Jake had faced danger before, but something about this night felt different. As they approached the warehouse, the air was thick with tension. The door creaked open, revealing eerie shadows cast by flickering overhead lights. Jake signaled Rex to stay close. The K9's sharp eyes scanned the area, his instincts on high alert. Then, bang! A gunshot rang out. A searing pain shot through Jake's leg as he collapsed to the ground. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. He reached for his radio. "Officer down! Officer down!" But before he could do more, he saw movement. Figures rushing toward him, their faces masked, weapons raised. Then came a growl, deep, menacing. Rex sprang into action. With lightning speed, the dog lunged at the nearest assailant, clamping his powerful jaws onto the man's arm. The attacker screamed, struggling to shake him off. The others hesitated, their confidence wavering. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was coming. But would it be too late? Jake fought to stay conscious, his last sight before darkness taking over. Rex, standing protectively over him, refusing to let anyone get closer. The steady hum of the police radio filled the patrol car, blending with the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windshield. Officer Jake Williams sat behind the wheel, his fingers wrapped around the steering wheel with practiced ease. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where the faint glow of city lights shimmered in the distance. Beside him, his K9 partner Rex sat alert, his keen brown eyes scanning the streets ahead. Jake had been on the force for 6 years, and in that time he had learned to trust Rex more than most people. Their bond was not just built on training, it was forged through countless high-stakes operations, foot chases and late-night patrols, where Rex had proven time and again that he was more than just a police dog. He was Jake's partner, his protector, his best friend. It had started years ago when Jake was assigned to Auburn's K9 unit. He had been given the choice to work with several dogs, but something about Rex stood out. The German Shepherd had a fire in his eyes, an untamed energy that others mistook for stubbornness. But Jake saw it for what it was, raw potential. They trained together tirelessly, learning each other's strengths, weaknesses, and instincts. Now, after years of working together, they needed no words to communicate. One glance, one subtle movement, and Rex knew exactly what to do. And tonight, that silent bond was about to be tested like never before. The radio crackled to life, snapping Jake out of his thoughts. "All units, be advised. We have an active burglary in progress at the old steel warehouse. Possible armed suspects. Proceed with caution." Jake's grip on the wheel tightened as adrenaline surged through him. The steel warehouse. It was located on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years, yet a known hotspot for illegal activity. If the suspects were armed, this could turn dangerous quickly. "This is Officer Williams responding," Jake said into the radio. "En route to the location. ETA 5 minutes. Rex let out a small, eager huff, as if sensing the tension in Jake's voice. Jake reached over and gave him a firm pat. "You ready, boy?" Rex's ears perked, his posture straightening. He was always ready. As the patrol car sped through the rain-slicked streets, Jake's mind ran through the possible scenarios. Were they dealing with a simple break-in? Or was this something more? By the time they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The warehouse loomed before them, its rusted exterior barely illuminated by a flickering streetlight. Puddles of rainwater glistened on the pavement. Jake cut the engine and scanned the area. No getaway car, no movement. Something felt off. He pressed the button on his radio. "This is Officer Williams. I'm on site. No visual on suspects yet, but the scene looks suspicious. Requesting backup." The dispatcher responded almost immediately. "Copy that, Officer Williams. Backup is en route. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Jake exhaled slowly. In his line of work, 6 minutes could be the difference between life and death. He turned to Rex, giving him a silent hand signal. The K9 instantly lowered his body, his nose to the ground, sniffing for any trace of movement. A moment later, his body stiffened. He had picked up a scent. Jake's instinct screamed at him. He drew his weapon and approached the entrance cautiously. The door was slightly ajar. He nudged it open, wincing at the loud creak that echoed in the empty space. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few flickering overhead lights. Rows of old wooden crates were stacked against the walls, some covered in years of dust, others recently disturbed. The air smelled of damp metal and something else, something that made Rex's ears twitch and his body tense. Gunpowder. Jake barely had time to process the scent before, bang! A gunshot rang out. Pain exploded through his leg, sending him crashing to the ground. His vision blurred as he clutched his thigh, feeling the warmth of blood seeping through his uniform. His heart pounded in his chest. He struggled to keep his grip on his gun, but the pain was overwhelming. Through the haze, he saw movement, figures emerging from the shadows, their faces obscured by ski masks. 3, maybe 4 of them, weapons raised, advancing toward him. His radio was just inches away. He reached for it with trembling fingers. "Officer down! Officer down!" His voice was weak, but he hoped it was enough. The figures drew closer, then came the growl. Deep, menacing. Rex. In a blur of fur and muscle, Rex lunged at the nearest attacker, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The suspect screamed, trying to shake him off, but Rex was relentless. The other men hesitated, their confidence wavering. Jake forced himself to stay conscious. Backup was coming. He just had to hold on. But as his world began to darken, one thing remained clear. Rex, standing protectively over him, refusing to let anyone get closer. The world was spinning. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears, the sharp pain in his leg, making it nearly impossible to focus. He gritted his teeth, pressing his hand over the wound, but the warmth of his own blood, spreading beneath his fingertips, told him what he already knew. It was bad. His leg was soaked, his uniform dark with crimson. Every second that passed made him weaker, but he could not afford to be weak. The warehouse's dim lighting cast eerie shadows against the walls, and the 3 masked men were closing in. Their boots scraped against the cracked concrete floor, their guns still trained on him. They were confident, too confident. They thought he was done for. They had forgotten about Rex. The German shepherd stood protectively over Jake, his body rigid, ears pinned back, teeth bared in a vicious snarl. His sharp eyes darted between the armed men, assessing the threat, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His growl was low and guttural, vibrating through the empty space. The man closest to Jake hesitated, his grip tightening on his gun. "Stupid dog," he muttered under his breath. "Big mistake." Rex lunged. In a blur of muscle and fur, he crashed into the attacker, sinking his teeth into the man's arm. The suspect screamed, staggering back as Rex twisted his powerful jaw, refusing to let go. His gun clattered to the floor, sliding across the warehouse. "Get him off me!" the man shrieked, trying to shake Rex off, but the K9's training was unmatched. The other 2 men snapped out of their shock. One raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Rex released his grip on the first attacker and launched himself at the second. The force of the impact knocked the man to the ground, sending his gun flying. "Shoot the dog!" one of them yelled, scrambling to grab his fallen weapon. Jake knew Rex was outnumbered. Even with his training, He was fighting against 3 armed men alone. If they managed to get a clean shot, Jake clenched his jaw and forced himself to move. His entire body protested, pain lancing up his leg, but he did not care. Gritting his teeth, he reached for his gun, his vision swimming. Just as the 3rd suspect raised his weapon at Rex, Jake fired. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. The bullet struck the man's shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground with a strangled cry. His gun slipped from his grasp, clattering uselessly against the floor. Jake's breathing was ragged, his grip on his gun shaky. His strength was slipping fast. The remaining suspect, the one Rex had tackled first, had managed to break free. He was already backing toward the exit, his hand pressed against his bleeding arm. He glanced between Jake and Rex, realizing the situation was turning against him. "Screw this," he muttered. Then he turned and bolted. Rex snarled and made a move to chase, but Jake whistled sharply, the only command the dog needed to stop. They had more pressing concerns. The 2 other suspects were groaning on the ground, clutching their wounds, but Jake knew better than to assume they were no longer threats. He needed backup. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, he reached for his radio, fingers trembling. "Officer down," he rasped. "2 suspects detained. 1 fled the scene. Need immediate medical assistance." The dispatcher's voice crackled through. "Copy that, Officer Williams. Backup and paramedics en route. Hold tight." Hold tight. Easier said than done. Jake's vision blurred as he slumped back against the cold concrete, his breathing shallow. The pain was excruciating, his body growing colder by the second. He felt detached, like he was floating somewhere between consciousness and oblivion. But then, warm fur pressed against his arm. Rex the canine whined softly, his ears flattening as he nudged Jake's shoulder. Despite the chaos that had just unfolded, Rex was calm now, his concern evident in the way he hovered protectively over his handler. Jake managed a weak chuckle. "I am still here, buddy." Rex let out a quiet huff and lay down beside him, pressing his body against Jake's side as if to keep him grounded, to keep him warm. Outside, the distant sound of sirens finally cut through the rain. Relief washed over Jake, but it was quickly overshadowed by exhaustion. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the warehouse walls. When Jake awoke, the world was blindingly white. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled his ears. The air smelled of antiseptic. Hospital. The realization hit him slowly, his body still heavy with fatigue and medication. Then something warm pressed against his hand. He turned his head, and there was Rex, sitting faithfully beside his hospital bed, his big brown eyes watching Jake with unwavering focus. The sight brought a lump to Jake's throat. "You stayed?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Rex huffed as if the question was ridiculous. Of course he stayed. The door to the hospital room opened and Chief Anderson stepped in, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. "You gave us a hell of a scare, Williams," the chief said, his voice gruff. Jake tried to sit up, but the sharp pain in his leg stopped him. He winced. "The suspects?" "2 in custody," Anderson replied. "1 still on the run, but we will get him." His gaze softened slightly. "You did good, son." Jake exhaled, the weight of the night pressing down on him. But then Anderson's face turned serious. "Listen, you lost a lot of blood. The doctors say it will be a long recovery. We do not know if you will be able to return to active duty." Silence stretched between them. Jake swallowed hard. The thought of never returning to the force, of never working alongside Rex in the field again, was unbearable. Rex seemed to sense his distress. He rested his head on Jake's lap, his warm presence grounding him. Jake clenched his jaw. Number. He was not ready to give up. His journey was not over. It was just beginning. Jake lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The pain in his leg was dull now, numbed by medication, but the ache in his heart was something no amount of painkillers could fix. Jake lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The pain in his leg was dull now, numbed by medication, but the ache in his heart was something no amount of painkillers could fix. The words the chief had spoken still echoed in his mind. "We do not know if you will be able to return to active duty." He had always known the risks of the job. He had always known that one bullet, one wrong move, could change everything. But knowing it and living it were two different things. He glanced down at Rex, who was still curled up beside him, his large frame taking up most of the small hospital chair. The German Shepherd had refused to leave his side since the moment Jake had woken up. Even now, Rex's eyes flicked up to him every few seconds, as if making sure he was still breathing. Jake reached out, running a hand through Rex's thick fur. "What happens now, buddy?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Rex let out a low whine and nudged Jake's arm. Before Jake could say anything else, the door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped in. Lena, she had been his closest friend on the force, his former academy partner, and someone who had always been there through every high and low, but tonight her usually confident face was clouded with something else. Worry. "You look like hell," she said, trying for a smirk, but the concern in her eyes betrayed her. Jake huffed a laugh. "Feel like it too." She stepped closer, her gaze flickering to Rex. "They told me you woke up? I had to come see for myself." Jake shifted slightly in bed, wincing at the movement. "So tell me, how bad is it?" Lena hesitated, then sighed. "Your leg is pretty messed up. They had to do surgery to remove the bullet, but the damage—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "The doctors say it is too soon to tell if you will ever fully recover. They are not sure you will be able to return to active duty." Jake clenched his jaw. He had known it was bad, but hearing it out loud made it real. Silence hung between them for a moment before Lena sat down at the edge of the bed. "But you are alive, Jake. That is what matters." He let out a bitter chuckle. "I know, but if I cannot go back, if I cannot work with Rex anymore—" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "What am I supposed to do?" Lena's expression softened. "You are more than just a cop, Jake. And Rex, he is not just your partner. He is your family. Whatever happens, you two will figure it out." Jake looked down at Rex, who thumped his tail against the chair. "Family." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, we will." But deep down, doubt still gnawed at him. The days in the hospital stretched into weeks. Physical therapy became Jake's new reality. The pain was unbearable at times, but he refused to let it stop him. Every session was a battle, one that left him exhausted, frustrated, and questioning everything. Rex was there through it all. When Jake struggled to walk, Rex was his shadow, his silent encourager. When the pain became too much, when Jake wanted to give up, Rex would nudge him forward, reminding him why he was fighting. And then one day, something changed. It was during one of his toughest therapy sessions. His legs felt like lead, his muscles screaming in protest. He was about to call it quits when a familiar sound stopped him. A bark. He turned his head to see Rex standing at the edge of the room, his tail wagging, his ears perked. The dog's expression was clear. "Keep going." Jake exhaled sharply. And then, step by painful step, he did. It was not easy, it was not fast, but with every day that passed he pushed harder, and Rex never left his side. Months later, Jake stood outside the Auburn Police Department, his cane resting against his leg. The sun was warm against his skin, but there was a cold weight in his chest. This was it. He had been cleared for light duty, office work, paperwork, training new recruits. But deep down, he knew it was not the same. He knew he could not be the officer he once was, and Rex deserved more. As if sensing his thoughts, Rex sat beside him, his eyes locked onto Jake's face. "You knew this was coming, did you?" Jake muttered, running a hand through his partner's fur. Rex did not move. He just watched, waited. The door to the station opened and Chief Anderson stepped out. He looked at Jake, then at Rex, then back again. "You sure about this?" the chief asked. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah." Anderson sighed, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a set of papers. "It is official then." He handed them to Jake. Jake stared at the papers. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words, "K9 Retirement Approval." Rex Williams, it was done. Rex was no longer a police dog. He was just Jake's dog now. The chief placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You both went through hell together. You earned this." Jake swallowed hard. "Yeah, we did." Jake sat on his porch, Kane resting beside him. The past months had been the toughest of his life. Pain, doubt, frustration. But one thing never changed: Rex. The German Shepherd sat beside him, watching, waiting, just like always. Jake exhaled. "Guess we are both retired now, huh?" Rex huffed, unimpressed. A small smile tugged at Jake's lips. Maybe retired, but not useless. The next morning, he limped outside. Rex followed, tail wagging. Jake tossed a ball, just a few feet. Rex fetched it instantly. Jake tried again, a little farther this time. Day after day they trained, not for the force, but for themselves. His strength returned. High confidence grew. And one day, he realized, he was whole again. Months later, Jake stood at a local training facility watching a group of new recruits. "Ready?" he asked Rex. The dog barked, eager. Jake smiled. They were not done helping people, not yet. This was not a comeback. It was a new mission. In a powerful moment of loyalty and love, an injured Auburn officer receives a visit from their brave K9 partner. This emotional bond between officer and dog reminds us of the unwavering commitment they share in the line of duty. Watch the touching reunion unfold and witness the strength of their bond that goes beyond the badge. Join us in honoring these heroes. Share this incredible moment with others.